Welcome back everybody to MCReviews, the show in which I attempt to review every single Monstercat compilation album, track by track, album by album, starting way back in 2011 and going all the way up to today. If you're a long-time viewer of this series, you will have noticed that I kinda just stopped uploading these videos and put the series on hiatus just as I was finishing my reviews of the third compilation album, Momentum. I am from now on hoping to resume the series, maybe not with quite as frequent uploads as I did, but I will resume the series nonetheless. So, album 4 is the last Monstercat album that I barely know. From album 5 onwards, I'm pretty much familiar with all the tracks, but for the most part, album 4 is still a mystery to me. The artists that were introduced on the album were .exe, Muzzy, Tristam, YH, and Resonate, which in all honesty is a pretty impressive lineup, with Muzzy and Tristam being some of Monstercat's biggest names and Resonate being a really talented producer. This album is looking pretty good. So something that does not look so good about this album is the track that we're going to be talking about today. The first track on Monstercat 004 Identity is Deadline by Project 46 and Gemellini. So, anyone who has seen my past reviews of Project 46 songs will know that they have had a really rocky start on Monstercat. All of their tracks that I've talked about so far were borderline awful, as they were just repetitive and unoriginal house tracks that were about 3 times longer than they had any right to be. Slide wasn't as awful as the rest of their tracks, but everything else they've reviewed by them has been just terrible. The other artist that worked on this track is called Gemellini. He also worked on another Project 46 track called Crazy, which we'll talk about a little bit down the road, and god, am I dreading talking about that track. But from what I can tell, Gemellini is a pretty standard generic house producer. They moved on to big beat recordings after making Deadline and Slide on Monstercat, and still produce below average house on that label to this day. And so from the outlook, Deadline isn't looking like it's gonna be the best track. So the intro is like all Project 46 songs, it's just a generic house beat with basic pinging melodies and lots of white noise fade-ins. It has elements slowly being introduced into the song, with the most interesting of which being quite a loud piano melody which fades from the background and into the foreground of the track. There are also some cool small little electro house basses that are added into the background, which give the track a small level of drive which the generic house beat really failed to do. A white noise fade out triggers all of the elements of the track to drop out except for the main piano melody, and this melody, while it was kinda cool earlier while fading into the track, when that is all there is in the track and everything else has been taken out, it gets really boring really quick. More generic white noise triggers background strings to come in an attempt to add a layer of emotion to the track, which it doesn't because it's about as basic as strings can get. And yet again, a white noise fade in triggers an actually quite nice backing pad which adds emotion to the track much more successfully than the strings did. At 1 minute and 47, the build-up finally comes in, which should give some indication of how boring the song has been up until this point, considering that everything I've just described lasted nearly 2 full minutes before any significant change. As for the build-up itself, it's a pretty standard house build-up. It has escalating melodies which introduce the main bass of the drop, escalating beats, and plenty of background rises. It's not particularly offensive, but it's the same type of build-up I've heard 100 times before, and it just bores me, as like everything in these early house tracks, it just lasts way too long. And before we get to the main drop of the track, I'll just say that while this isn't the worst intro that Project 46 has done, it's still really boring, and it's at least a minute too long. It does really nothing new. And I just also want to talk about how sick I am of white noise fade-ins. They're just such a lazy way to fill up a song, and they serve no other purpose than to mask how basic a track really is. They're ugly sounding and are completely overused in a lot of Project 46 and Eminence's earlier work, and I can't wait for them to be a thing of the past. As for the actual drop of the track, at first I was pleasantly surprised by the electro house bass, which was actually quite heavy and had a lot of bassy drive to it. This bass worked well alongside the surprisingly good house beat as well, which was heavy and had a lot of bass, and was accompanied by some really well-placed offbeat kicks. The drop's issues begin to rear their head when you realize that nothing is changing in the drop, like nothing at all. The first 30 seconds of the drop are just a 4-second loop of the beat and bass repeating 10 times over with not a single drop of variation or change. And this wouldn't be as bad if the main bass of the song had any variation in that loop, but it has none. It's just one note being repeated 10 times for 30 seconds. seconds. While this drop seemed cool at first, after 10 seconds of nothing changing, it gets boring really quick, and then you add another repetitive 20 seconds of no change after that, and you've got an incredibly unvaried and boring track. Once the track finally does change at 30 seconds into the drop, there is an obligatory white noise build up and a couple of average melodies which are laid over the main bass. They don't make all that much difference, but it's enough to save the drop from being absolutely awful. This more melodic part of the drop is repeated for another 30 seconds and then the drop finally ends. This track then goes into a minute-long midsection, which is probably the best part of the track. It uses the same piano melody from the intro and adds elements like strings, pads, generic beats, and a genuinely good synth melody periodically. This part isn't too long and it has a nice pace at which the individual elements are included, and as a whole it's probably the best part of the track. The second build-up comes in and surprises no one by being the exact same as the first. Again, it's just average at best and it lasts way too long. And now we get to the second drop of the track, which, surprisingly, isn't 100% identical to the first. It has a new main melody, which is plastered over the electro house basses and beat that we heard from the first drop. And this new melody is fine, I guess. There's not too much to say on it. It's just an electro house melody with nothing special or surprising. The only other difference between the two drops is that the second only lasts 30 seconds and doesn't have a second part like the first drop did. The second drop closes into a typical Project 46 boring, minute-long outro consisting of elements of the track we've already heard repeated many times, fading out to leave nothing but a boring house beat and white noise fade-ins which end the track. So yeah, that was Deadline by Project 46 and Gemellini, the first track of Monstercat 004 Identity. And while it isn't exactly the worst song I've talked about on the show, it's still pretty damn terrible. I liked the sounds that we used in the drop at first, and the midsection was genuinely quite well done, but it shares the same problems as all of the other early house tracks on Monstercat. The intros, drops, and outros all last so much longer than they should and end up being really boring really quickly. Even though some of the song's sound design is pretty decent, as a whole, coming in at 6 minutes 20, this track ends up being really boring. And when it comes to scoring the song, I feel very similarly to how I felt about Slide by Project 46 from the last album. It shares many of the same issues, but also has the same few positives. And as such, this song is going to be getting a 3 out of 10 as well. It's a song that isn't necessarily terrible, but it's definitely bad and well below average. So yeah, this track didn't particularly surprise me, and I doubt any Project 46 song will for a long time. Nowadays, house is one of my favourite genres of music, but it's going to be a long time before I have much positive to say about it. Let me know down below if I was too hard on Deadline. Are you into early house? And if you are, let me know what you like about this stuff, because I just really don't get it. The next review you will see on my channel in the next few days will be my review of the 2/3 remix of The Destroyer by Muzzy, and damn, am I excited to talk about that track. But until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.